This will hopefully be the first in a series that we'll be running. Hopefully you can all see the slides I'm sharing and can also see me, maybe less fortunately than the slides. This first module is module 1, and what we're going to be doing is an introduction to psychology. What is psychology? What are we talking about when we're thinking about the mind and the behaviour that results from it? And we'll also look at a real psychological study as we go through and talk about the importance of studying psychology in terms of the real world implications it has on all of us in our relationships with people, the way we work, and just about every element of our lives. Especially thinking about the current circumstances we find ourselves in when we're being asked to not interact physically with our friends and families who we don't live with, and thinking about how we respond to that and how an understanding of psychology can support. And then finally, we'll look at the different types of careers there are in psychology. And so just before I move on to the next slide, can I just ask the couple of people that have just joined to mute your microphone? It's the background noise for everyone. So what is psychology? The word psychology comes from two Greek words where the origins lie. The first being psyche, which means mind or soul, and the second being ology, which comes from the scientific study of something. And so when we merge those two words together, what we get is the study of the mind. That is a literal translation of the source of those two words. And in the early days of psychology, psychologists really did focus on the structure and the functioning of the brain through a method that we call introspection. And so this is thinking about what and how we are thinking when we're engaging with certain things. But introspection isn't a particularly scientific approach. It's really open to interpretation, and we can't actually see what's going on in a person's head. We can only infer or assume. And so therefore, over the years since the start of psychology, psychologists have developed different ways of studying what and why people behave in certain ways. And eventually it was agreed, by most psychologists at least, that it is important to look at what people do and to listen to what they say. Because these are things that we can observe, these are things we can measure. And so we could agree on how to measure that. And I mean, psychology really does influence, as I say, everything that we say and do every day. Whether or not we've studied it, it's something that we all do, amateurs or as professionals. And it impacts our relationships, the way we behave, what we expect from other people, and what other people expect from us. And as it says here, it said on the previous slide, sorry, something you may have heard is psychology is the study of common sense. And this really is true because these are things we're all doing, but through psychology we look to objectively and scientifically measure that. And with that, we're going to look at probably a more meaningful definition of what psychology actually is. And that's what it says on this slide here. Psychology is the scientific study of the mind and behaviour. And just before I go into breaking this down, I should have said at the start, if anyone has any questions while I'm going through, please use the chat function in the corner to message these in so I can answer as we go through. I think it'll be slightly easier than muting and unmuting. So let's unpack this definition of psychology being the scientific study of the mind and behaviour. Let's break this down. What is scientific study? Scientific study is the reliable and objective measurement of data. So to use another science as an example that you've probably all studied is physics. And in physics, you can measure the same action over and over again and identify a relationship between point A and point B. So for example, if I drop my phone once, it's going to fall to the ground and hit the floor. If I drop it twice, it's going to fall to the ground and hit the floor. If I do that 3-4 times, it's going to do the same thing over and over again. What we're seeking to do with psychology is build those same links between, for example, when we're looking at the phone falling to the floor, we can look at gravity and different elements of physics that I'm by no means an expert on. But what we're looking to do with psychology is look to build those relationships and those connections between the thoughts in our head and the behaviour that people demonstrate in their real lives. And this is something we all do every day in our interactions with friends and everyone we come into contact with. Every interaction we have with someone, we're almost collecting a piece of data on that person, both consciously and unconsciously. So, I mean, for example, if I ask a friend of mine if they want to play a video game with me 3 times and they say no every single time, I can start to build a connection there between that person and whether they want to play that game with me. And I can then predict that the 4th time they're probably going to say no again. So that is what we're trying to do, build and establish those connections. The next element of this definition is about the mind. What does the mind mean? This is about mental processes. The mental processes are the things these are conscious and unconscious things we do all the time. When we're awake, when we're asleep, it really is non-stop. For example, you might make a conscious decision to go to school in the morning, but this is then followed by an unconscious decision to move your legs in that direction on the walk. You're not consciously telling your right leg to step forward and then your left leg to step forward. So these really are things that your mind is doing all the time, whether or not you're aware of them. And then the final element of this definition is behavior. What does that mean? That's really the observable actions that we can see in ourselves and in other people. So for example, if you've made that conscious decision to go to school, the behavior that can be observed is you turning up to school in the morning. So if your teacher sees you walking into school, they know that your mind has made that decision to go to school. There can be a connection between your mind making that decision and the behavior of you being at school. That really is what psychology is. But of course, it's really not that simple. There are so many other factors to take into account when we're trying to build a connection between the mind and behavior. For example, you might well be making that decision because you want to go to school and you want to learn English in your first lesson, but you might actually just be going to school because you don't want to be in trouble with your parents, or you might be going to school because you want to go and see your friends. There's so many other factors there which are influencing the behavior that we see. So we as psychologists are really trying to understand those different factors and build a picture of a person to understand the connection between the factors and the decisions you're making and the behavior that you are demonstrating afterwards as people in general. And so this is something that we're seeing more and more of at the moment in terms of the strange behavior we're seeing from people. We're seeing people behave in ways that we ordinarily would never have seen. We're seeing people stockpiling things in supermarkets. And it's down to us as psychologists to try and understand what is leading to people making these strange decisions that we're seeing in supermarkets and elsewhere in our lives. What are the different factors resulting in these behaviors? It could be anything. It could be because people are scared. It could be because people want to be prepared. It could be actually that this is just something that these people do every day and we've just never noticed before. Although I do highly doubt that with this group of people. So let's look at a real psychological study that was conducted in the 1960s by a famous social psychologist called Walter Mischel. And this study looked at children and whether, if they're told they can eat a marshmallow right now, and they can have that, or they can wait and they can get a second marshmallow. And it looked at whether children would just take the one that they could have right now or wait and get a second one if they could resist eating it. And the study looked at whether there were differences between people who chose to eat it or chose to wait. And so I've got a short video clip I'd just like to show here that summarises this study really nicely. Let me know.
Okay, sit in that chair. All right, here's the deal. Marshmallow for you. You can either wait, and I'll give you another one if you wait, or you can eat it now. When I come back, I'll give you another one, so then you'll have two. But stay in here and stay in the chair till I come back, okay? All right. All right, so I'm gonna leave and then I'll come back, okay? So you can either eat it right now or you can wait. Either way, okay? Okay. How'd you do? Did you do good? You did?
Yeah.
You wanted to eat it, didn't you? Yeah. So did I tell you to give you another one? Okay, now you can have both. You need them.
So this, let me just go back to this slide. This, as I say, this is a very famous psychological study that was run in the 1960s. And you can see just from what I said introducing it, some of the children found it relatively easy to sit there and just resist eating it, knowing that there was something good coming later on if they could. Others just found it impossible, and they wanted it immediately before the experimenter, the person running it, had even left the room. They're already eating it. And this isn't just a funny video to see how different people respond, but this is an example of different choices that we face every single day. And it's really a great example of how a knowledge of psychology can make a big difference to you, especially in the current time of our lives. It provides you with the knowledge of how you can make well-reasoned judgments and the decisions which bring you and others the greatest benefit. For example, these children knew that waiting would bring the best benefit for them, but somehow they just couldn't resist waiting. And so an example we can all think about at the moment is if you think yourself about the reaction you first had when you heard about the lockdown and you realised you weren't going to be able to meet your friends, go to the park and see your friends whenever, even at school you're not going to be able to go and see your friends. What was your first reaction about having to delay your fun? Think about how you responded to that yourselves. And as I say, these are decisions we make every day with things that we encounter. That being one example of something immediately right now. There are other examples of things we face every single day. For example, getting home from school or getting home from work for me and wanting to play video games. But with you've probably got homework to do, but you just want to play your video games. But you know, if you could just do your homework first, you'll be able to enjoy those games later on without your parents bothering you. But still, you just want to do it in that moment. And another example there around exercise in terms of it's easy to finish a workout early and not do the last couple of press-ups or last couple of sit-ups, because that's the easy way out, that's the nicer finish to it. But knowing that by sticking with it, you'll get greater benefits afterwards. And the reason I talk about a foundation of psychological knowledge helping us is because we are all at our core creatures of habit. And I'm sure that term creatures of habit is one a lot of you will have heard. But what it actually means is that we as people are the things that we do and the behaviors that we display most often. And we can build these habits to overcome the challenges we face, no matter how big or small they are. For example, an example for me is every day before dinner, I want to eat a packet of crisps before dinner. I know that if I don't eat them, my dinner will be nicer, I'll enjoy it more, but I still want to do it. So the habit I have to build for myself is not eating the crisps before dinner, but it's very easily to slip back into that more negative habit. And so an example to link back to the one I said at the start, we have to build a habit of not going out and seeing our friends and recognizing that the benefit of this habit at the end is that less people will get sick, and when we finally can go and see our friends, it will be so much more satisfying, it'll be so much more fun because we've waited for it. And the term here on this slide and the previous slide, delayed gratification, that's a bit of a technical psychological term, but what it really means is being able to delay having a good thing now for a better good thing in the future. And this is what an understanding of this enables us to understand other areas of our lives. When we can create the habits that enable us to delay a good thing now for a better good thing in the future, that impacts other areas of our lives, such as scores on SATs, people's tendency to, in later life, abuse alcohol and things, and to be obese in later life. This is why psychology is so valuable and so broad, because an understanding of concepts such as this enable us to understand so many other things that we interact with in our lives. And this is because the aims of psychology are built on these 4 areas, or these 4 pillars. First of all, we look at people, we look at studies to be able to describe the behaviour that we see from people. And by understanding and describing that behaviour, we can then explain why it's occurring, and therefore predict other behaviour that's going to occur from that person, and actually from other people as well, from building up more and more data from the people we see. And then once we can predict it and we can explain behaviour, we can really reinforce positive behaviour changes, such as me not eating my crisps before dinner, and such as you waiting to do your homework until you play your games in the evening. And these are all positive changes that will have wide-reaching impacts on other aspects of our lives. The final area I should say there, what I've mentioned is that psychology does have, as I've mentioned several times, such a wide-ranging impact on our lives, on all those factors I showed you on the previous slide. And psychology genuinely will help people in every single career that I can really think of. That is why businesses bring in psychologists to help their people, because an understanding of people, an understanding of relationships and the reasons people respond in certain ways really, really supports us in everything that we do. But that being said, there are some specific areas where psychology knowledge will guide us, if you like. And for this, we've got a short video to explain this.
Final take. Dawn, I'm sorry to bother you while you're working, but I've got Alex's GCSE options here. I'm a little bit concerned that he's chosen psychology.
Why? Why are you bothered about that?
Well, I'm just not sure what opportunity psychology will bring to him.
Well, I mean, I think it can kind of cover a range of areas. My friend Sarah, you know my friend Sarah, she works in psychology. And she works in a business environment. So she works with people, really helping them to identify their kind of key strengths, focus on their self-development, and she absolutely loves what she does. She was telling me last week about a woman that she's been working with, helping her to focus on her own sort of development. And this woman's just got a massive promotion. And, you know, Sarah really kind of gets a lot of satisfaction out of that. She's really passionate about it.
Okay, I didn't realise people with psychology did that sort of thing. I thought it was all helping people with phobias who couldn't leave the house and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that is a field of, you know, helping people who, you know, have problems that make it hard for them to sort of interact with the world. But there are other types of fields. So, you know, in the context of Alex, for example, you know, he's talked in the past about being interested in being a teacher. And there's a whole field of educational psychology, which is working with kids who have got, you know, emotional or social difficulties or learning difficulties. So that would be a good way that psychology would support something that he's interested in.
Yeah, I haven't thought about educational psychology. But he's so young and he's got so much opportunity. Like sport, he loves all sport, he's really good at sport, and if he excels, what good is psychology going to be then? Again,
you know, there is a field of sports psychology, rather. So where there are psychologists who work with sports teams or individual athletes to really help them to keep focusing, keep developing, to cope with some of the pressures of playing, certainly professionally. And so again, that's a way that could potentially link. I don't see it's limiting anything.
No, and I bet he hasn't even thought about being a sports psychologist. And
that, I mean, that's kind of the key thing. You know, a lot of the things that people think about initially with psychology are the things you may be more familiar with from, say, the TV. So criminal or forensic psychology, so working with the police to create profiles, or working with the prison service to rehabilitate offenders. So, you know, there are just sort of different directions that it can go in.
Yeah, okay. You're making it sound like a really good option, but what I don't know is the sort of things he's going to have to study in it.
As far as I know, it's very much aligned with the other sciences. So, you know, that's going to be a combination of research, statistics, you know, he'd need to learn the terminology related. I know there is very specific terminology from when I talk to Sarah, and sometimes she's telling me about work and I have to get her to explain the specific terminology that, you know, that comes with it. And as far as I'm aware from talking to her, it's much more of a science than certainly I was aware of before she went into that field.
Okay, well, I think you've shown me that psychology is a great option for Alex. I'm going to go and find him and let him know.
So I hope what that video has done is shown that there really are so many different routes which can be pursued with a psychology degree and psychology training, A-level and GCSEs and everything. And they've outlined a couple there, but I just want to, in the last couple of minutes, outline some of these areas that people often pursue when they have a formal training in psychology. The first of these is business psychology. This is the area we work in at Zircon and B Talent. And this is about helping organisations to be successful through their people, bringing in the right people to a business and assessing people, training people and helping them to be motivated and understanding how to motivate people and develop people in the right direction. The next is clinical psychology, and this is the more TV version that you probably think of, in terms of sitting on a sofa and listening to people's psychological issues that they may be struggling with, applying the science and the theory to support people with overcoming issues with well-being and psychological disorders that they may face. Next is educational or developmental psychology, and this is thinking about how and looking at how people develop, how people learn languages, but not only language, just acquire knowledge. How we learn about ethics and what is morally right, and therefore understanding how we can measure whether someone is developing in the right way or not, and how we can really support that. So especially thinking about how schools can support that. Then there's forensics or criminal psychology, which is like the CSI type TV shows that people think of, about applying psychology to solve crimes, to understand why people commit crimes, and using this to find people and profile people, and understanding the psychological disorders which often people who commit crimes do suffer with. Cognitive psychology is the like abstracts or really research focused side of things that is done in a lot of universities about the mental processes. Almost thinking about a brain like a computer in the way that it processes information and the way that we store memories and then retrieve memories, for example, and other information that we have in our brain. Health psychology is about ensuring and helping people to engage in healthy and positive behaviour, especially thinking about recovering from illnesses and diseases, and developing programs that support people in recovery especially. Then there's sports psychology, and this is an area that really has come to the forefront of psychology over the last decade or so, whereby most sports teams and individual athletes as well have psychologists who support them with dealing with pressure, remaining motivation, recovering from injury, and performing to the highest level that they possibly can. And then the final slide here is consumer psychology, and this is about marketing, but also about understanding why people purchase things and how people respond emotionally to buying products and services, and engaging with that in the right way from a business perspective. So as I say, these are just the real clear areas that people often pursue with a psychology degree. But as I mentioned, the benefits of it are far further reaching than just those areas, and it will benefit you in so many other ways. And I hope that this really brief, fast introduction has shown that it is really a subject to be very passionate about, because of everything that's achievable through it. And I know I've overrun by a couple of minutes there, and we don't really have any time for questions, but I'd really like to encourage you all to, if you do have any questions, to reach out to us via our LinkedIn, via our Instagram and our Facebook, and let us know any questions that you have, and we'd be more than happy to answer those. And we'd also really like it if you join us next time, where we'll be looking at resilience, so how we deal with stresses, especially thinking about the current climate that we're working in. And so Following this session, there is another session on psychology, which is an advanced session, which is commencing at 2:30. If you'd like to join this, then you'll have to leave this call and rejoin the other